I'm Tom Haregrove. I serve as Extension Veterinarian with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service.
I'm Mark Dykes. I'm the Chief Apiary Inspector for the Texas Apiary Inspection Service.
So basically, with the Veterinary Feed Directive, most people know, Feed Directive took effect the 1st of this year. And under the Feed Directive, medications to treat bees are included. Veterinarians are going to have to write feed directives or prescriptions, whichever is appropriate for feed or water grade antibiotics. And so basically what we're here today is to talk a little bit about bees. And so Dr. Dykes is going to visit with us a little bit just about bees in general, about bee diseases, about where you can send some of your stuff to get diagnosis and stuff, what you need to send, and then just basically a little bit of history and kind of information on bees. And so, Dr. Dykes.
Thank you. So today we're going to talk, as he said, about bees, beekeeping, and the diseases that affect bees. Just to give you an overview of what we're going to talk about, first we're going to begin with a little introduction to the Texas Apiary Inspection Service. Then we're going to talk about beekeepers and then beekeeping, and then follow that up with pests and diseases, and finally end with information on the apiary law and on resources that you can use to learn more about honeybees. The Texas Apiary Inspection Service was established in 1910 as a foul brood suppression service. American foul brood is still found throughout the honeybee industry right now. It's not as big as it used to be, but it's still an issue, so we still inspect for it. We're housed at Texas A&M under the AgriLife Research Department of Entomology. We operate under Chapter 131 of the Texas Agricultural Code. Beekeeping in Texas, you're going to find several different types of beekeepers. First is the commercial beekeepers. Those are large beekeepers that have a large number of hives. Then you have an intermediate type of beekeeper we could call the sideliners. And then you have small scale or hobby beekeepers. The commercial operations you'll find do pollination and do honey production and do queen rearing. Sideliners still do that, but it's not their main source of income. And then finally hobbyists, which are backyard beekeepers that generally have under about 25 hives. What's interesting to note is that in Texas, a majority of the beekeepers are hobbyists. However, they have a very small number of hives when you compare it to the commercial operations, which have a very large number of hives, in the upwards of 200,000 plus. So that tells you a little bit about the beekeepers. Let's move into beekeeping. There's several terms that you're going to hear that can be kind of confusing, especially if you haven't worked around bees before. So I just want to go over those real quick just to get them out of the way and to give you some information. The first one is a colony. A colony is an assemblage of workers, queens, drone, that live together as a single unit. Another term you'll hear out there is a hive. A hive is what we refer to as a box or a place for honeybees to live that we provide, that beekeepers provide. Another term you'll hear often is a nucleus or a nuke or nuke. That is a small box of bees that's generally a division of a larger hive. And then finally an apiary. An apiary is a place where you'll find bees and beekeeping equipment that's where the bees are kept by the beekeeper. So next let's move into a couple of the safety equipment that you will need to work the bees safely. First we have the veil, which what that does is it protects your face from the bees coming at it and allows you to work the bees comfortably. A lot of people will use more than just a veil. They'll actually use a full suit, either a jacket or one that covers your entire body. And that's a good precaution to allow you to work the bees safely and comfortably. You also can wear gloves, and they have different styles of those. The next thing is the smoker, which what the smoker does is it produces smoke, obviously, and that covers the pheromones, the alarm pheromones that the bees produce, and allows you to work the bees without getting them really stirred up. And then finally we have the hive tool, and what this does is allows you to manipulate the hive and pull frames out, unstick boxes, that type of thing. So very important piece of equipment. The next thing we're going to move into is the actual hive. The different pieces of it. The top is what's called a cover. Underneath that are the supers or boxes. Generally speaking, the top box is called a medium or a honey super. The larger box below that is a brood chamber or brood box, and then all of that sits on a bottom board. Generally speaking, bottom boards will either be solid or they might have a screen in the middle for debris to fall through. This is the normal setup. However, you'll find different configurations depending on the beekeeper's operation. When working bees, it's important to have proper safety gear on. As you can see, Mary here has a jacket with a veil included. This will keep the bees from stinging her torso. She also has gloves, and these gloves are what they call a gauntlet style. They have this mesh that extends down, and what that does is allow her to pull it up over her arm so the bees can't get up into the glove. Next, you'll notice she has a very sturdy set of pants on. Bees can sting through most materials, so it's important to have good thick denim. If you're really worried about it, they do make suits that cover your entire body. In the Texas heat, those can be kind of dangerous at times because it doesn't let the air in and you can get kind of overheated quickly. So that's why jackets are worn a lot. And you'll notice Mary's boots, but more importantly is that her pant legs are tight around the ankle. What happens is bees that are crawling on the ground will often crawl up your pants and can sting you that way, and you don't want to have that happen to you. So, but with this full ensemble here, Mary can safely work the hives and generally won't receive any stings at all. This is the front of the hive. This is the landing board where the bees will come into the hive. Starting from the top, this is the cover. You'll find different styles of cover, but this is a telescoping cover that we like to use. The second box here is generally referred to as a medium or a honey super. This next box is the deep or a brood super or brood chamber. And then finally we have the bottom board, which has the landing board on it, which is what everything sits on top of. A lot of times you'll find those with either screen in the middle to allow debris to fall through, or there'll be a solid bottom board. So when you approach a hive, you'll always want to do it from the back. If you approach the hive from the front, like from here, what'll happen is the guard bees will be alerted to your presence and may defend the hive by stinging you. Just real quick to talk a little bit about the smoker and the fuels that you can use for it. Pretty much anything that burns that doesn't contain chemicals you can use for smoker fuel. We like to start it with a little bit of pine straw because it's easy to get going, and then we'll use wood chips because they burn a lot slower and it lasts a lot longer. But if in a pinch, you can actually just use grass clippings if you want. Okay. Next, we're gonna light the smoker. We have a little bit of wind today, so it may take a second, but this will at least show you how to get it going and give you a little idea of what you're doing. So first I'll take a bundle of pine straw and kind of knot it up there. And then inside the smoker, I'll go ahead and light it off. And you always want to be careful when you're doing this, especially if it's been dry out, because this can very easily light off the surrounding grass. So once I get a good smoke going there, I'll take a little handful of wood chips and put it in. I'll pack that down, and I continue to stoke it. Then once it's going, put the top back on, and you're ready to go.
Okay, as a veterinarian, you know, we're always concerned about biosecurity issues. And even, of course, veterinarians are regulated basically by the Animal Health Commission, USDA. So if we move certain classes of animals, whatever, interstate or intrastate, depending on the disease, sometimes we have to get called a certificate of veterinary inspection or a health paper. So tell me a little bit about bees, because we're talking about diseases where we have to destroy hives and stuff like that. So let's just say that I live in East Texas and there's somebody out in West Texas that has some beehives, and I want to buy some bees. Can I just go out there and load them up and bring them, or do I have to get a permit, or do I have to get inspection? How does that work? Sure,
there's a couple layers here. First off, we primarily inspect commercial operations. So those operations that are going across the United States for pollination services. Generally, we will inspect them once a year, or they need an inspection from their state of origin. If they're based out of North Dakota, South Dakota, somewhere like that, we would require that state send us the certificate of inspection that's valid within the last 12 months. If they are transporting bees across county lines in Texas, in other words, if they're taking them from an apiary in West Texas and moving them to East Texas, they would require an intrastate permit that is issued by our department. as well as if they were importing the bees from out of Texas, they would need an importation permit into Texas.
So do you actually have to go inspect the bees before you give them the permit?
Generally what we do is we'll inspect the operation. We
Okay.
don't inspect the individual beehives just because of logistical purposes. You know,
Okay.
some of these beekeepers can have upwards of 30,000 hives.
Okay.
But what we'll do is we'll look at the operation, make sure that we don't see foul brood rampant in the operation. It may infect certain hives over time. Generally the beekeepers will report that to us and destroy the hives. But we won't inspect every single hive, but we'll inspect a subset of that operation.
Okay, so as a practicing veterinarian, I'm trying to write a prescription or a feed directive, whichever is appropriate, and I'm going out and I find a piece of grass or a toothpick or whatever, and I stick it in there, and I get this ropey, foul smell and stuff. Am I obliged to report that to somebody? Am I required to report that to somebody, or is that the owner's responsibility? Or kind of tell us how that process works. Because what's our liability as veterinarians in this?
As a veterinarian, you should report it to us. The owner of the hive is the one that's legally obliged to report it to us. We may work with the vet to have them destroy the hive, and after we receive samples of it, it will take that on a case-by-case basis, depending on the level of infection and how many hives are infected in that apiary. But at minimum, we're going to require that hive be destroyed, and we will quarantine that apiary for at least 21 days for one brood cycle, and then go out there and retest or re-look at the hives to make sure that the foul brood hasn't spread to adjacent hives.
Okay, so to be clear, if the veterinarian suspects that, and would he send a sample to your lab, or would the producer send a sample to your lab? I mean, I'm assuming the veterinarian would if he's going to have to prescribe a drug for that. He's going to have a diagnosis.
If the veterinarian is the one doing the diagnosis, we would recommend the vet send it to us.
And then he would also, of course, once you've got it and you knew what it was, then it's reported anyway.
Exactly.
But if he suspects it, then he needs to report it to you. Is that correct?
Exactly. And we have submission forms on our website, and information on how to submit samples.
Okay.
And if they have questions, they can always call us, and we can give them the step-by-step of how to do that.
Certainly.
The next thing I want to talk about real briefly are the pests and diseases of the beehive. I'm going to real quickly go over the major pests that are found in the hive, and then I'm going to discuss a little bit about American foul brood, which is the reportable pest here in Texas. In the hive, a lot of times you'll find varroa mites, which are parasitic mites that are on the backs of the bees or on the other side. And they're a big problem because not only do they predate on the bees, they also spread viruses. And those are a major problem in the beekeeping industry right now. Next is nosema, which is a gut parasite. The next two, small hive beetles and wax moths, are not actual pests to the bee, they're pests to the colony. So they will eat the resources, they will disrupt the colony in that way. Trachea mites are mites that actually can be found in the trachea of the bees. Chalk brood is a fungal infection that the bees can get. And then finally, viruses. Bees are known to have quite a number of viruses that have a lot of very detrimental effects on them. The last thing is European foul brood, which is similar to American foul brood, but that foul brood will generally go away on its own, and it's not as virulent as American foul brood. The one regulatory disease that we do have here in Texas that you will at times treat with antibiotics is American foul brood. American foul brood is a spore-forming bacteria. Once it gets into the diagnostic phase where you're actually seeing the symptoms, the hive needs to be destroyed. This is done by looking at, or this is noted by looking at not only the frames to see the indentions in the brood, but also with what we call the rope test, where a piece of grass or a toothpick is stuck into the brood, swirled around and pulled out. If that rope's out more than an inch, it's a good indicator that it possibly has American foul brood. American foul brood, like I said, is a reportable disease, and if so, it needs to be reported to Texas Apiary Inspection Service. Real quick on the laws, we are under, like I said before, the Agricultural Code, Chapter 131, under Title VI. Texas Apiary Inspection Service is responsible for bee diseases. The Texas Department of State Health Services is responsible for honey, so any consumable products in the hive. So that's where those differentiations happen in the law. We are allowed or have the power to seize or order the destruction or treatment of beehives that are infectious or detrimental to the industry. Like I said before, American foul brood is the only reportable disease, and if that's found in the hive, it needs to be reported to us before the hive is treated or destroyed for proper diagnostics. Texas Apiary Inspection Service does have a diagnostic lab. We can test American foul brood, European foul brood, test for varroa mites, trachea mites, and nosema, all within our lab here. Generally speaking, if we do diagnose it with American foul brood, we will send that to the USDA for further testing, just to verify, but it is, once we diagnose it, at that point we would destroy the hive. Here are some resources that you can use to find out more about beekeeping. Texas Apiary Inspection Service, our website, has a number of links and resources that you can use. We also do recommend the e-extension Honeybee Health page. It is a cooperative extension, the nationwide network of extension agents that deal with honeybees. It's their clearinghouse for information. If you have any questions or want more information on honeybees, please feel free to give us a call or shoot us an email, and we'll be very happy to help you. Thank you very much for your time. So next, let's move into the honeybee itself. The honeybees that we work are not native to the United States. They're native to Europe primarily. However, we do have Africanized bees in Texas, especially in the southern parts of Texas. And those have intermated, so they're hybridized between European and Africanized. There are 3 castes of bees, no matter if it's European or African. The worker, which is the ones that do all the maintenance of the hive, they collect the honey, they collect the pollen. They're an all-female caste. Next you have the queen, who is responsible for laying the eggs and using, and having a pheromone communication that keeps the hive kind of going. And then finally you have the drone, which are the male caste, and those are used for reproduction. The next thing I want to talk about is the brood, which is where you will find the different diseases of the honeybee. There are 3 types of brood that you'll find in the hive: the queen, the worker, and finally the drone brood. And as you can see by the picture, the queens look like little peanuts that hang off of the brood comb. Second are the workers, which are more flat to the comb. And then finally the drones, which have a very high domed brood cells. Next, I want to talk about the frames you'll find in the hive. The frames are generally formatted in the same way. On the outside of the frame, the bees will store the honey, and it'll be either nectar that's being ripened into honey, and if it's nectar, it'll look like water in the cells. Honey is actually covered and sealed. The next layer in will generally be the pollen ring. Pollen is generally brightly colored, yellows, greens, that type of thing, very noticeable. And then at the very center of the frame is generally where the brood is, and you'll have both uncapped and capped brood. And so that's where you'll look for the diseases like American foul brood and European foul brood. Next, I want to talk just real briefly about beekeeper safety. It's very important when you're working bees to always approach from behind. Bees are defensive in nature. They want to protect their hive. So if you approach from the front, the guard bees will fly out and buzz you and possibly attack and sting you. You also want to use smoke before you enter the hive to calm the bees, and then as you're working the bees to continue to use smoke. The other thing is, if you're not used to working bees, work with a partner. That way if something happens, you're not stuck out in the beehive or incapacitated where you can't get help. Always have your escape routes identified. And then finally, if you need to have it on hand, an EpiPen that's prescribed by a doctor, please make sure that's readily accessible by you and your partner. We don't want to have any accidents out there in the bee yard.
Dr. Dyke, when we think about bees or we talk about bees, the first thing that comes to my mind is Africanized bees and the threat that they have. And you know, if I'm trying to mow the grass or I'm trying to all these other things, could you kind of visit with us a little bit about Africanized bees? What's the risk? And
sure, absolutely. And that's still a very real risk here in Texas. We do have Africanized bees throughout Texas. A lot more in the southern parts than the northern parts, but they're still found just about everywhere, or can be. Africanized bees are cousins of the European bee. They're just a subspecies. What differentiates them from the European bee is that they are much more defensive of their hives. And so whereas European bees may have 10 or so guard bees, Africanized bees can have more, and their defense response is a lot stronger. So where 100 would sting you with European, 1,000 would sting you with Africanized. And so we always say treat any hive with respect and understand that Africanized bees are not looking to hurt you, they're just defending their hive. So it's very important to be cognizant of your surroundings. If you're out mowing, if you know a beehive exists, be careful around it. If need to, go ahead and have it removed either by a beekeeper or a licensed pest control operator, so it's not near in the area that you're going to be mowing. Bees are often agitated by mechanical sounds, engines, weed eaters, that type of thing. So the best defense that you can have is be aware of your situation, understand where the bees are, and just be careful when you approach them. If you do not have proper training, we do not recommend trying to remove a hive yourself. Leave that to the professionals. If you have questions about that, you can always call our office at the Texas Apiary Inspection Service, and we will be glad to give you information. And we also provide a list of beekeepers that are compliant with the structural pest control law that do bee removals without pesticides. So by all means, give us a call. We'll be glad to educate you a little bit further about that. And most of all, be safe and be aware around the bees.
We talk about bees, and to be perfectly honest, until bees come under the feed directive, my knowledge about bees is still next to nothing, but at least I know a little bit more about it. But could you tell us a little bit about distribution of bees around the state? Are bees, is it more common in East Texas, West Texas? Is there a difference to managing those bees? Because that's one thing I'm finding out talking to the extension agents. There's a lot more bees in a lot of these counties than I thought there were.
Absolutely, and there really are regional areas that have more bees than others. So the way that we look at it is east of Austin is the primary area of beekeeping in Texas up to about Dallas and then down to the Gulf. Okay. But during the spring, a majority of the bees are located down near the Houston area. And what they're doing there is they're building up off of the Chinese tallow and different blooms in that area. West of Austin, there is some beekeeping even out to El Paso, but it's very sparse just because of the terrain. And so in those areas that are wetter, a little bit more, I'm not gonna say tropical, but a little bit more warm throughout the year, that's where you'll generally find the beekeepers.
The veterinary feed directive has actually been in place since 1996. But in the last, starting about 2011, and then finally in 2013, the FDA said over the course of 3 years we would kind of evolve into a lot of changes to the feed directive. So basically those changes took over-the-counter antibiotics that would go into the feed or the water and move those into, in the water, in the case of the water, they're prescription antibiotics. In the case of the feed, they're actually veterinary feed directive antibiotics. Either way, they're under veterinary oversight. So if you're getting feed grade antibiotics to treat livestock or anything else, you're going to have to go to your veterinarian. These over-the-counter, any medically important antibiotic. Now that's antibiotics that these antibiotics that relate back to antibiotics to treat humans. So all of those that were just over the counter, which means I could go into any co-op, feed store, whatever, and buy them. Now they're going to require that I go to the veterinarian and get some kind of a piece of paper, if it's a feed directive or a prescription. Okay, now honeybees, actually, they use some of these drugs in treating some of the diseases of honeybees. And so basically the antibiotics are tetracyclines, lincomycin, tylosin. So those antibiotics that used to be just we could go to the local co-op, feed store, whatever, and purchase those antibiotics. Now you're going to have to go to your veterinarian. So that's we're trying to make sure that everybody's coming up to speed on how they obtain those antibiotics, because veterinarians are going to have to justify the use of those antibiotics records and stuff like that. So again, if you need to contact your veterinarian within these issues, and again, we've talked a little bit about diagnostics where we can send some of this stuff today, but just understand that In the last 2 months, these laws became effective the 1st of January 2017. So in the last couple of months and from now forward, these antibiotics previously we just got at the co-op are going to have to go through a licensed veterinarian. So one of the resources, is there a potential to put up a website or something for veterinarians, and could you talk a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. What we can do is through the Texas Apiary Inspection website, we can develop a tab for veterinarians. And so what we'll do with that is we'll put this video along with any other pertinent information on there for veterinarians. One of the things we can do is include a short little section about just introduction to beekeeping, just to go over the safety aspects of it. So when you're out in the bee yard, you can do it safely and do your diagnostics, you know, in relative comfort.
And with forms and stuff and how to submit to the lab and all that,
Sure,
you'll have all that
absolutely.
information.
We can show you how to not only test for foul brood, but how to properly wrap it to ship it, and give you the address for our lab here, and allow you to have, you know, direct contact with us if you have questions about taking those samples.